He has accomplished for us. And I pray that you would give me word and power to preach it. And I pray you would make it more real to our hearts. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right. I was planning on starting to do a 3-part series on John chapter 5 for the next 3 weeks. And then we were going to look at Hosea. But I went to the doctor last Thursday and found out the results of my second MRI. And we came to the conclusion that it's better to do both knees at one time than to do one and then come back later and do the other. So I was planning on doing one and then thinking I'll be able to preach, but I'm going to be in a wheelchair and I won't be able to stand. So I'm going to wait for 2 weeks to preach the 3-part series on John 5, and then we'll look at Hosea. But Herman is going to preach. Herman Stevenson, who preached a couple weeks ago, is going to come and preach next week for me. So I just wanted y'all to know that. But this morning, as I thought about it, because I had to change what I was going to do on Thursday, and I was like, well, because of how fear is running rampant in our country today, I thought we would look at a different text. And the text is going to be Mark 4, 35 through 41, and the title is not The Quest for Rest, because we're not looking at John 5. The title is Dead Calm. Now, the past couple of years, I've been noticing that one of my fears is actually getting worse. You know, most of you know about my fear of sharks, right? Swimming in the ocean and sharks, not just any sharks, but great white sharks, okay? Let's just be honest. I have a fear of great white sharks. But one of the fears that's probably my greatest fear is the fear of heights. And this fear is getting worse and worse the older I get. Whenever we drive to Colorado, and I know my kids are going to laugh at this because they know exactly what it's like to be with me in the car when we're driving through this particular part in Colorado called Independence Pass. Independence Pass is a very narrow passageway through the mountains that cuts off about an hour and a half to get to Aspen. But I have a love-hate relationship with Independence Pass because it is absolutely beautiful. It is stunningly gorgeous. But I never get to enjoy the beauty because I'm always the one who has to drive through it. And there are 4 spots that absolutely freak me out. Okay, and I'm going to just give you a little flavor of what it's like. It could be 40 degrees outside, and I got the AC blowing because these 4 spots cause me so much tension and anxiety that I am white-knuckled, sweating like crazy, and constantly need the AC on to wipe down my hands so they don't slip off of the wheel. Nobody can talk in the car. The music is turned down really low. I bend down so that I'm not up where I can see the edge, because these 4 spots, when you're on the outside lane, there is no guardrail and it's only a drop-off. So my wife, she spots me, okay? So she's the one looking ahead to see if there's a car coming, because during these spots, if a car is not coming, I do not stay in the outside lane. I go into the lane I'm not supposed to be in. And if there is a car coming, she tells me, then that's when it absolutely freaks me out, because I have to get into the outside lane. And I kid you not, I go about 10 miles per hour. And there's a row of angry cars behind me, honking their horns because of how slow I'm going. And it's not until we get past these spots, then I can pull off and let them pass. But here's the thing. You would think the more I drive this, the easier it would get. But no, it's actually getting harder for me to drive it. I now have nightmares the night before I have to drive it. And then my neck is so sore for the next couple of days because of how tense I am driving through Independence Pass. What are you afraid of? What keeps you up at night? What overwhelms you and floods you with anxiety? You see, all of us fear. Fear is a universal human experience. Some fears are legitimate. Like if you are in the ocean and you see a great white shark, you should be afraid, right? If you're on the outside edge and you look down, you should be afraid of falling off the cliff. So some fears are legitimate, but some fears are not so legitimate because they're misplaced fears. Fears that can actually cripple us from functioning. Fears that actually rule and control and govern what we do or don't do. Fears like the fear of rejection, right? The fear of having somebody's disapproval. The fear of not being accepted, not being recognized. The fear of having somebody look down upon you can cripple you. Or the fear of failure. Fear of making a mistake. The fear of losing. The fear of not looking good. The fear of not amounting to anything. The fear of always having to be right. Or the crippling fear of feeling worthless. Of never measuring up. Of being a nobody. Of being alone. See, all of us fear, but we don't all fear the same things. Some fears are greater than others. Some fears affect and control us more than others, but we all fear. Do not fear is the most commanded phrase in all the Bible. 300 times this phrase is commanded to us, which means if this is the most frequent command in the Bible, this is the greatest struggle that we go through as human beings. Our text this morning is all about fear. But the reason why I want to look at it is because I think it gives us a unique contribution to the struggle that we all have with fear. You see, the contribution is that it not only exposes what the root of fear is, but it also gives us the remedy for fear. So, I'll have you stand because this is a short passage. Mark 4, I'm going to read verses 35 through 41. And just real quickly, to give you the context, all of chapter 4 is about Jesus teaching, but teaching his parables. But what's interesting is that he's teaching parables while in a boat on the Sea of Galilee. Okay, and I'll describe and mention that, explain that a little bit more later. All right, so on that day, on the day that he was just on the lake teaching, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took with them in the boat, just as he was, and the other boats who were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. This is Jesus. They woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke, and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" Or some translations, it's still a question, where is your faith? And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" This is the word of the Lord. All right, I prayed, so let's jump in. Now, to better understand the feel the force of this passage, we need to get the geography here and build the scene, okay? In chapter 4, the place where Jesus is at on the Sea of Galilee, it's the western side of the lake, which is the Jewish side, okay, the religious side. It's the side where there's gentle slope that leads to it. See, the Sea of Galilee, it's like a basin. Okay, the sea is here, and there's a basin of hills and mountains around it that come around, and it's almost like an amphitheater. So it's a great place for Jesus to teach because his voice would be amplified in this area. Okay, but that's the western side. The eastern side is the Gentile side. The eastern side is rough. There's cliffs, there's rocks, there's crags. It's hard to navigate a boat through there. So the Sea of Galilee is enclosed by these mountains and hills, and it is 700 feet below sea level. But just 25 to 30 miles to the northeast of the sea is Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is 9,200 feet above sea level. So from Mount Hermon, they always talk about in the Psalms about how the dew and also the wind comes down from Mount Hermon. So this northeasterly wind coming down from the mountains is colder. And when this wind that is colder hits the rising, warmer temperatures from the Sea of Galilee, causes this tempestuous weather condition. And you know what people today call this northeasterly wind? Sharkia. Arabic for shark. Why? Because if you're caught in it, it's going to bite you. Now, we've been there, and we've experienced some of these winds. And I can tell you, it almost knocked me off of my feet. But here it is. Look at verse 35. On that day, when evening had come, Sharkia hits. But it's not a normal early evening storm. Because remember, who are the men in this boat? They are 4 very experienced Galilean fishermen who are accustomed to the storms on their sea. But what's happening to them? They're freaking out. So this is just not a normal storm. Look at how the storm is described in verse 37. Literally, a great storm of wind arose. This is a tornado, basically, coming upon them while they are in the sea. The storm is so powerful that the description is the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat is already filling up with water. And the word for breaking into the boat, it means to lay hands on. So it's like the water and the storm are being personified here, where the waves, the water is laying hands on the boat, pulling it down under the water, and it's beginning to fill so much so that they're about to sink into a watery grave. The disciples are scared to death. And I know I would be if I was in that boat in that same situation. And I know you would be too. Anybody would be scared to death if they were in their shoes. Because when fear like that hits, your heart starts racing. Shortness of breath. Your lungs can't get enough oxygen, right? Anxiety floods your mind, and then panic overwhelms you with the thought, we're going to die. And I don't know about you, but the 2 worst ways to die, for me, fire and drowning. And yes, just like you, I think about those things, right? So is it any wonder that the disciples are full of fear here? Is it any wonder they cry out to Jesus in verse 38, "Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?" But it's the way that Jesus responds to them in verse 40, which is very interesting. Because he doesn't say, "Hey guys, I understand. I understand why you would be afraid in this situation." He doesn't say that. No. What does he do? He asks a diagnostic question to probe into their hearts. Why are you so afraid? You see, Jesus is asking this so that they can investigate, so that they can probe to see the answer to his question. Which means that the presence of fear is a pointer to something deeper. You see, fear doesn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? There's a reason why people fear. And Jesus is wanting his disciples to look at the presence of fear in their hearts so that they can discover what the root of that fear is. Now remember, there are legitimate fears and there are misplaced fears. On the surface, doesn't this look like the disciples' fear is legitimate? Holy cow. They're stuck in a boat in the middle of a lake and a great storm comes. A storm that is so powerful that the waves are pulling the boat under, filling the boat with water, and it's about to sink, and they're about to drown. This is a legitimate fear, isn't it? Except for one little thing. Who's in the boat with them? Jesus is in the boat with them, and he's not afraid. He's asleep. Why do we fear? Don't we fear the things that we can't control? And don't we try to control the things that we think we most need and must have? See, we try to control and get the thing that we most need, and then if we don't get it, or if something interferes with us getting it, what happens? We fear because we can't control it. So, what is that something that you think you must have? What is the it that you are trying to control and get that is actually filling you with so much fear? This could be anything, right? Because even though we all fear, here's the thing, we don't all fear the same things, right? See, what causes you fear may not be the thing that causes me fear. Okay, and I debated whether I was going to do this, but just to give you a little insight into my own heart here, okay? As a pastor, I fear what you think of me. I do. I fear that you're going to view me as a bad pastor. I fear what you think, so I try to control how you view me. I fear preaching a bad sermon. You know why? Because if I preach a bad sermon, you're not coming back. People won't visit anymore. Church will shrink, and it'll fold. Yeah, I'm Jesus. I have a God complex, if you haven't figured that out, right? No. I fear preaching a bad sermon. That's why I spend 25 to 30 hours sometimes a week on it. Because I fear what you think, I have a hard time saying no. Because I fear what you think, I don't always take a day off during the week. I try to be the answer man who's always right. And if y'all haven't figured this out yet, I'm pretty good at making you think I know what I'm talking about, even when I don't. I try to control how you view me because I don't want you to view me negatively. And here it is. Even though I know I can't control how you view me, I still try. And I still fear. How about you? Some of you try to control your financial security because you fear that if you don't have enough money, you're not going to be able to do the things you want. So you work longer hours. You get home late. You miss family meals. Maybe you spend, a couple of hours with your family each day. And some of you, you're not going to turn down that promotion because it means more money. And more money, though, means more time away from the family, where you miss your children's activities, their games, their musicals, their performances. Others of you, you fear being disrespected. So you try to control and demand respect from others. And if they don't give it to you, you shut them down and you cancel them. Or some of you, I put it this way, you presently live in the glory days of the past. Or you live making sure everybody knows your present accomplishments. You always try to one-up every story. You dominate the conversation. Or you are constantly consumed with, hey, how can I bring the spotlight back to myself? Others of you, you fear being known. You don't want to be alone, yet you fear if somebody knows you the way you know yourself, that they're not going to want anything to do with you, that they're going to reject you, they're going to be disappointed in you. So what do? You keep people at arm's length, right? You only let them get as close as you want them to be. You never really open up and become vulnerable to people because you can't control what they would do with your vulnerability. So, what do? Well, some of you avoid social gatherings. Or you don't avoid it, but actually go because you want to be seen, but then you leave early so that you won't be known. You see how this works, or should I keep going? We fear what we cannot control. And we try to control what we think we need and must have. So, what is the it that you must have that you're trying to control, but so afraid because you know you can't? You see, the disciples, they couldn't control the storm, right? So they were afraid. But if we probe a little bit deeper here, we see that the storm did not cause their fear. You got to get this. The storm brought out and revealed what their fear is. See, how do we know this? Because Jesus was not afraid. The storm didn't bother him. He was asleep in the stern of the boat on a cushion while the storm is raging. And yeah, you could say, well, of course he's not afraid because he's God, right? But he's also fully human. Don't miss that. He's also fully human. So Jesus, as the perfect human, he's showing us how to remain calm even during the storm. You see, the storm doesn't cause the disciples fear because it didn't cause Jesus to fear. The storm reveals the root fear in their heart. And Jesus wants them to see it. So what are they really afraid of? Well, look at verse 38. Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? This is the first recorded words of the disciples in Mark's gospel. And the first recorded words of the disciples in Mark's gospel are a rebuke to Jesus for his lack of care for them. And doesn't this rebuking question reveal what their root fear is? Jesus, do you really care for us? I mean, typically when we look at the disciples, we think, what's wrong with these guys, right? They're a bunch of idiots. What a bunch of knuckleheads. When are they going to learn? And why do we think that? Because they're always failing, right? They're always doing the wrong thing. They're always saying the wrong thing. But we don't view them that way here, do we? No. We understand their fear in this situation, don't we? We sympathize with them in this situation, don't we? Why? Because we get this fear. Because all of us question God's care for us. Especially when storms hit. When storms hit in our lives, we're just like the disciples. When things go wrong, when things don't go as planned, when bad things happen, what do we think? God's asleep. God's absent. God doesn't care. Because, let's face it, God, if God really cared about me, He'd know what I'm going through, and if He knows what I'm going through, then He sure as heck wouldn't allow this to be happening right now. If He knows what I'm going through, He would not have allowed me to go through it. If He really loved me, He would not have allowed it to happen. I would not be going through this. I would not be struggling with this. If God cared for me, things would be different. I wouldn't feel so abandoned and all alone. And because I do, God, you must not care for me. See, the root fear of the disciples is the root fear of all of us. We all fear that God doesn't really care about us and that He will abandon us. You see, we can't control the storms in our lives. We can't. We can't control the storms that hit us in our lives. But when they hit us, we think that because God allows it, He's unconcerned. He doesn't care. He doesn't really love me. And that's just simply not true. And our text actually proves it. Look at verse 35 again. Come, let us go to the other side. Jesus is the one leading them into this storm. Jesus is the one saying we will get to the other side. So, because Jesus is the one commanding them to get into the boat, to go to the other side, this text shows us that God does lead those that He loves into storms. It shows us that God does allow those that He loves to go through storms. And I know that this is hard for us because we can't understand why. Why would God allow this? Why would God do this? It's hard for us to make sense of why God allows suffering. It's hard for us to make sense of why God allows pain and hurt in our lives. Because what father enjoys seeing his son or daughter struggle and suffer? None. And here's where the remedy for fear comes into play. But before we look at it, I want to read a quote to you that I think may give us a different perspective. In his book, The Reason for God, Tim Keller says this. He says, if you have the premise that if God loves you, then He wouldn't let bad things happen to you. If you have that premise, you have the wrong premise. God can love somebody and still let bad things happen to them. Because He is God. Because He knows better than we do. You see, if you have a God great enough and powerful enough to be mad at because He doesn't stop your suffering, you also have a God who's great enough and powerful enough to have reasons for it that you can't understand. Because we don't understand the reasons for it, it doesn't mean that there aren't any reasons for it. And when we don't know or understand the reasons, then where does that leave us? For some of us, it leads us to fear that God's abandoned us, God doesn't care for us, God doesn't really love us. And then for others, it leads them to bitterness, leads them to anger at God. But our text is actually wanting to lead us in a different direction. Our text is meant to lead us in the direction of faith. Okay? You see, the remedy for fear, the only thing that is powerful enough to drive fear out of your heart is faith. Look at how Jesus responds to their rebuking question in verse 40. Why are you so afraid? Where is your faith? The remedy for fear is faith. But faith in what? Faith that God won't allow any storms into my life? Or faith in Jesus' untamable love and unfailing care for us amidst the storm. You see, when faith in Jesus' untamable love for you is not present, fear rushes in. So faith is the remedy for fear, because faith in Jesus' untamable love is what drives and casts fear out. Gosh, but if you're like me, saying that, yeah, here's the remedy for your fear. Faith in His untamable love. That doesn't do it for me. Does that do it for you? No, I got to see it. And I want you to see how Jesus proves His untamable love and care for His disciples in verse 39. He awoke. He rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Now, this is the third time in Mark's gospel where the word rebuked is used. The first two times was in reference to Jesus rebuking unclean spirits and casting demons out of people. And this is fascinating because the command, "be still," okay, God's in the grammar. You got to know this. It's a second person singular present imperative. Well, what does that mean? It means this, literally, you be still. You stay still. The wind and the sea are personified. And the word for be still, it means to muzzle. Like putting a muzzle on a wild animal so it doesn't bite you. Now you got to remember, back in this time in the ancient Near East, right, the sea was the dark place, was the place of chaos, was the place of evil, was the thing that is uncontrollable, untamable. The sea was a place of darkness, of chaos, where unknown evil creatures lurked. And with two words, Jesus controls the uncontrollable. With two words, He tames the untamable. He muzzles and quiets the storm so that immediately there's what? Complete calm. Okay, let's be honest. Have you ever seen this? This never happens, right? The winds can stop, but you've never seen the waves immediately be calm, right? No, it takes hours for the waves to be calm after a storm, doesn't it? But not here. Not here, which means this is a dead calm of both the wind and the waves. This is a supernatural stillness where everything is settled. Jesus is commanding what? Perfect peace. One commentator said that in verse 39, this is the language of an exorcism. Jesus is treating the storm as a personified force of evil, and without any effort, He controls it, He stills it, He conquers it. And did you notice the effect that this had on the disciples in verse 41? Because they went from being afraid to now becoming terrified. Who is this that even the wind and the sea obey Him? So the uncontrollable storm revealed their fear. But now they're in the presence of someone even more uncontrollable than the storm, and they're terrified. Now, some of the commentators on Mark, they've stated that this is the point of the story. That the point of the story is that the disciples should fear Jesus more than the storm. But I don't think that's the point. Because that's not the story's application. I think the point is verse 40. So if the point is verse 40, why are you so afraid? Where is your faith? Then fearing Jesus more than the storm is not the point. Because Jesus is rebuking the wind. He is rebuking the waves. He is calming the storm in order to drive out their fear. He doesn't want them to fear Him. He wants them to have faith in Him. Jesus wants His disciples to trust in His love and His care for them amidst the storm. You see, if the disciples believed in His love and His care, if they rested and relied on His love and His care for them, then when the storm hit, they wouldn't have been afraid. They wouldn't have panicked. Why? Because the one who loves and cares for them is with them. He's in the boat with them. And did He not clearly state in verse 35 that they would get to the other side? So why are you afraid? Do you not know how much I love you? That my love for you is actually an untamable love. It is a never-ending, it is a never-failing, it is a passionate and personal love for you. See, if the disciples had really believed that, then this story would have had a different ending, which is the point of the story. The story is begging for a different outcome, isn't it? One where there is more faith rather than more fear. So, how do we get more faith then? That drives out fear. Okay, maybe you saw it. I don't think you did because I didn't see it the first time, so that's okay. But Mark is wanting us to see it. Okay? You see, any Jewish reader of this story would have seen it because we've seen this scene somewhere before in the book of Jonah. This scene parallels Jonah chapter 1. And Mark wants us to see those parallels. First parallel, Jesus and Jonah, they're both prophets. Both had to go on a mission to Gentile lands, right? Jonah was supposed to go to Nineveh. Jesus is on his way to the Gentile side of the Sea of Galilee. Remember, I told you the western side is primarily the Jewish side. The eastern side is the rocks, the crags, the Gentile side. And then when they get there, that's where they meet the Gerasene demoniac. So it's freaky, okay? Second parallel, both Jesus and Jonah were in a boat, and both boats were overtaken by a great storm. Third parallel, both Jesus and Jonah were asleep, and the sailors had to wake them, saying, "Do you not care that we're about to die?" Fourth parallel, both Jesus and Jonah calmed the storm, and the sailors are saved. And finally, fifth parallel, in both stories, when the storm is calmed, the sailors feared God more than they did the storm. But the way the storm is calmed in both stories, it's different, isn't it? Or is it? You see, in Jonah, in order to save the sailors, Jonah had to sacrifice himself by being thrown into the sea. And then after he went under the waves, that's when the sea became calm. But in Mark's account, Jesus simply commands the storm to stop, and there's a deep calm, and there's perfect peace. See, the reason why Jesus can command perfect peace to produce a dead calm is not just because as God, He has the authority over the wind and the waves. No, it's because Jesus is the better Jonah. See, Jonah was unwilling to go to Nineveh to save others. Jesus was willing to go to the cross to save others. As the better Jonah, Jesus willingly threw Himself into the storm. The ultimate storm. The storm of God's wrath for sin. As the better Jonah, Jesus sacrificed Himself to experience your death. and to experience all of God's displeasure for your sin. He did this in order to save you from the ultimate storm, the only storm that can truly sink you. And that is the storm of God's eternal justice. So here it is. When you get why Jesus does this, when you get that Jesus willingly went to the cross to experience the storm of God's wrath, and that He did this in order to prove to you His untamable love, that He cares for you, that He's with you always, no matter what storm you face, no matter how often you fail Him, when His love and His care for you on the cross hits your heart, it will drive out fear. And it will increase your faith. You see, when you get that Jesus' sacrifice has settled your sin with God once and for all, then no matter what storm God allows you to go through, you can experience a dead calm, because you can experience His perfect peace. Amen. We are having it today, and I know this is going to be weird, but I'm going to